Wherever he was imprisoned, people asked the same question. Has Jack escaped yet, or is he still inside? At night, crowds would surge into the streets, not out of protest or fear, but in electrifying anticipation. They waited, breathlessly, hoping to be the first to spot him when he broke free, to stop him, perhaps, not to turn him in, but simply to shake his hand. Even when he was locked in the deepest cell, under the tightest security, the authorities didn't take chances. They ran special night patrols just in case Jack tried to escape, knowing that if he succeeded, he wouldn't leave a trace. To the public, he was a genius, and nothing could hold him. Jack didn't just break out of prisons, he broke into legend. His incredible escapes transformed him into an English icon, a name forever etched into folklore. His story has inspired over 650 artistic and literary works, and his name is woven into 149 popular sayings. But here's the most important question. Who was Jack? He wasn't a towering figure of crime. He wasn't a gang leader or a circus gymnast. Jack had a profession, one so precise, so rare, that it turned every lock in the world into nothing more than a simple illusion. By the way, if you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more fascinating tales like this one. To the common people of London, news of Jack's escape was more thrilling than the death of a king. They waited eagerly to see how he would do it this time. Because Jack wasn't just good at escaping, he was a master performer. Every escape was an act of defiance, and the credit always came down to one thing: his extraordinary personal skill and the mysterious profession that turned him into a working-class legend. As the saying went, no lock can stop Jack. It's all just an illusion. But now, let me surprise you with a detail almost impossible to believe. Jack was only 22 years old. All these unbelievable escapes were the work of a young man barely out of his teens. And perhaps that is what made his story so unforgettable. Because this wasn't a coordinated gang or a team of master criminals. This was one man who, in a short burst of activity, managed to escape custody at least 16 times. With one final, legendary breakout from the supposedly impenetrable Newgate prison. In London, in the year 1702, John Jack Sheppard was born. He came into the world in one of the city's poorest quarters, Spitalfields, and his early life was brutal. He and his family were far from the criminal underworld. They were simply working-class poor. But there's one detail I must tell you now, because it will shape the whole path of our story from beginning to end. When a person is born into harsh circumstances, they typically follow one of three roads. Which road they take depends heavily on the people closest to them and on how they choose to interpret the harsh events around them. If we look at criminology and the psychology of offenders, we often see a common thread. The environment they grew up in shapes them. Before we examine criminal behavior, we need to understand the three possible paths a person born into misery might choose. The first path turns someone inward, the ghost. Withdrawn, almost non-existent, they become a figure with no ambition, no dream, and no voice. They dodge responsibility, avoid decisions, and hide from life. Like millions today, they find isolation and invisibility to be the safest shelter from pain and old memories. They hide among people so no one can ever hurt them again. The second path is the opposite, the destroyer. This person becomes violent, aggressive, a killer, or a psychopath devoid of mercy. Every action is driven by hatred, for society, for themselves. and by a thirst for revenge. That's why courts immediately refer serial offenders to psychiatric panels. Their actions are often a consequence of the damaged world that raised them. The difference between the first and second paths is stark. One retreats and disappears. The other lashes out, bent on destroying the world that hurt them. The third path, and to be honest, the hardest of them all, is something else entirely. That third path is the rarest of all. The hero. Some people turn hardship into fuel. They take every challenge the world throws at them and forge it into an opportunity. History is full of them. From moral leaders like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., to political figures who rose from humble beginnings to rule nations, like Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in Brazil. For someone to follow this path, they need more than grit. They must have an extraordinary ability to read and analyze situations, relentless patience for the trials they face, and, most crucially, a guiding influence in their life who shows them right from wrong. That combination of talent for analysis, perseverance, and guidance is what turns desperation into greatness. I'm telling you this before we dive into Jack Sheppard's childhood, because he grew up under brutally hard conditions, and it was his eventual choice between these three paths that would set the course of his whole life. So, which path did Jack Sheppard choose? You already know the end. He becomes a legend of the criminal road. But first, let's meet the boy. He grew up in a brutal, unforgiving place. His father was a skilled, respected carpenter, a steady presence, until Jack turned 10. Before that tragedy, father and son worked side by side in the workshop, living in the grinding poverty of early 1700s London, with no schools or safety nets. Jack learned the trade at his father's elbow, acquiring an invaluable skill that would later redefine what a prison was. But when Jack was 10, his father fell ill with a fever. A week later, he was dead. The loss obliterated the family. Their father had been their single torch of light. With him gone, their house sank into hunger, cruelty, and shame. Jack's mother was forced into harsh domestic work, suffering immense hardship to feed her children. Life became a pile of misery. You might expect, knowing Jack later became a famous fugitive, that the boy immediately turned into a savage, a monster. But the truth was different. After his father's death, Jack retreated inward. He became path one for a long time, isolated, mute, and barely present. He barely spoke to his mother or siblings. He was a body without feeling, a ghost hiding from the world that had stolen his father. Nobody looking at the withdrawn, silent boy would have guessed that behind that shell lived an almost superhuman mind. Jack spent his days in his father's old workshop, shaping wood into marvels. By the age of 11 or 12, he could build an entire chair, a table, or intricate toys. Works his mother sold in the market. Soon, she stopped working outside entirely and relied solely on his craftsmanship. Jack wasn't forced to work. He was moody and distant, but every piece he made was a masterpiece of precision. As he grew, his creations became stranger and more inventive. Perfectly formed coat hooks, a complex toy train, even a wooden knife honed to slice fruit. By 13, he was making things no one in the quarter had seen before. He still didn't talk much, but 3 local children, 2 boys and a girl, began sneaking into the workshop to watch. Reluctantly, Jack let them in. Whether he liked it or not, they became his first friends. These small intrusions slowly loosened the ghost inside him. He stepped out of the pure discipline of carpentry and started to see the world with new eyes. But the change didn't end with friendship. By the time he was 14, something darker had taken hold. a gnawing hunger for revenge against the society that had crushed his family. This was the turning point, where Jack began to slip from path one toward the criminal life. Jack never became a killer or a brute. He became a thief. He believed that if his honest father had lived, the family would have had the comfortable life of any respectable tradesman. Instead, their lives were stolen by poverty and disease. So, with this fierce sense of stolen entitlement, he and his new companion started hitting the wealthy neighborhoods of London. He was only 15, but already a master thief. His method was pure genius, relying on the skills his father taught him: careful surveillance, a quick and invisible lift, distractions that left people looking the wrong way, and an escape plan that always fooled the constables. He didn't just steal, he choreographed it. One particular robbery, which we'll save for the end, changed everything and set him on the path to legend. But many of his minor heists show how unbelievably clever he was. On one occasion, Jack struck up a conversation with a local policeman. Turning charm into a weapon, Jack told the officer he was a wood carver and wanted to carve the man's face on a piece of wood as a gift. The policeman, flattered, agreed. Jack fetched a plank and began to carve. The cop was delighted. His colleagues crowded round to watch the boy at work. Jack carved the officer's likeness with such intense concentration and skill that everyone assumed he was shaping a genuine masterpiece. Then Jack said casually, "I'll make this into a plaque. I'll carve all your faces on it. Just keep standing still if you don't mind." This was the height of his brazen strategy, the perfect artful distraction. While their attention was fixed on the supposed portrait, Jack performed the lift, a seamless operation executed right under their noses. So there he was, the teenage thief, carving away while the officers smiled, feeling important, and waited for their portrait. Eventually, Jack handed them the wooden plaque. But instead of the promised masterpiece, what they saw was garbage. Crude, unfinished, almost an insult. They couldn't believe this rough piece of wood was what he'd been working on. Feeling mocked, they shouted at him, humiliated him, and kicked the worthless boy out of the neighborhood. Jack walked away in silence, seemingly heartbroken. The constables had no idea that while they were focused on the insulting plank of wood, Jack had quietly relieved them of their purses, their watches, and everything else he could carry. They had been robbed by the illusion of his craftsmanship. What the constables didn't realize was that the crude plaque was the perfect distraction. While Jack kept the officers entertained, two of his friends were just around the corner, robbing a wealthy house. That ugly little piece of wood bought them just enough time to pull off a coordinated heist. This wasn't just any street kid. This was a 15-year-old operating in the 1700s, pulling off jobs with military-level planning. Jack Sheppard was truly brilliant. Over time, Jack began to construct tiny, custom tools designed to defeat any lock. He would purchase padlocks, break them open, and study their inner mechanisms. He learned the architecture of locks like a surgeon studies anatomy. Then, using his master carpentry skills, he'd craft custom picks and shims from wood and iron, tailored to match each lock precisely. With these specialized tools, their robberies grew bolder and far richer. Eventually, at 17, Jack was caught. He was thin, short, and completely unassuming, hardly the image of a dangerous master criminal. They threw him into a mobile jail cart, a wooden prison on wheels, barred with iron and pulled by horses. What they didn't know was that Jack had managed to hide a tiny blade inside the cart itself. As the cart rattled loudly along the cobbled road, Jack sat quietly and began to saw through the lock from the inside. The latch was old and rusty, giving way with patient scraping and a few quiet taps. The lock finally yielded. He didn't move yet. He waited for the noise of the road and the rhythm of the horses to cover him completely. Then, at the perfect moment, he gave the door a slow push, and he and his two companions slipped out into the night. That was Jack's first recorded escape. From that moment on, Jack never went anywhere without his custom tools. He taped tiny metal picks to his fingers. He wore a small, multi-headed wooden key concealed on his knee that could open almost any lock. Strapped to his leg, hidden under his clothes, was a thin metal file. People thought the rags and bandages he wore were for old wounds. In truth, they were hiding his implements. Jack knew he would be caught again, and he was ready. Sure enough, just a year later, it happened. In a strange, cruel twist of fate. One of the officers who caught him this time was the same constable whose face Jack had carved 3 years earlier. Jack was 18 now. The officer recognized the young face instantly, and the shame of being mocked, laughed at, and robbed came flooding back. Furious, the policeman began beating Jack right there in the prisoner cart, raining blows on him all along the journey. Jack didn't fight back. He didn't scream. He didn't even flinch. He simply went limp. The officer, panicked that he had killed the prisoner, stopped the beating. Afraid of the consequences, he quickly switched places with another officer riding in a second cart. This left Jack alone and unobserved in the back of the first one. That was all Jack needed. His eyes opened. He realized the cart door, in the chaos of the officer's switch, hadn't been properly relocked. He saw the road was empty, and just like a lightning bolt, he launched forward, kicked open the door, and vanished into the nearest woods before anyone could grab him. 2 things happened that night. First, the police were left utterly defeated. They had no name, no identity, and no trail. Just a repeat thief who had escaped twice, once from a fixed jail and once from a moving one, leaving behind only the phantom of his reputation. And second, people saw it happen. Eyewitnesses described the daring escape of the thin, ghost-like boy who had broken free from the barred cart. The story exploded. Whispers became rumors. Rumors became a legend. The tale of the skinny boy who escaped the moving cage spread like wildfire throughout London. Once the story became a public craze, the authorities vowed to catch him at any cost. But Jack vanished completely. For 2 years, the trail went cold. Nobody knew where he'd gone. Yet during that silence, something shifted in him. The legend and the isolation seemed to have forced his hand. Jack was beginning to walk the third path. He never stopped stealing, but he became something more than a common thief. A mystery. No one, not even his own family, knew the shape of his life. He sent them money, but only indirectly. Coins left at doorways, payments slipped through friends. Rumors flew. Some said he hid in the woods, others that he joined gangs of highwaymen. Nothing was certain. Then, when he was 19, a small, pivotal moment occurred. He saw an old woman on the street, visibly burdened with heavy bags. Jack moved close, took the bags, and walked beside her. His plan, cynical as ever, was to take her loot once she was safely inside her door. But at the threshold, she stopped him. "You helped me," she said, looking straight into the heart of the boy. "You're a decent person beneath this roughness. I read faces. I can tell what people are made of. You were going to rob me. How about a little lesson instead? Do the lesson and I'll give you money. You deserve a chance, those words. Spoken honestly, without judgment or malice, hit him like a physical blow. They had the power to pull someone from the far edge of desperation back toward the center of life. Jack didn't speak. He only nodded and accepted the terms. He carried her bags into her home and sat with her. She told him stories about life, taught him how to think differently, and showed him how to choose. When the lesson ended, she handed him some money. He was stunned and profoundly grateful. Then she smiled and said, "If you want another lesson, come tomorrow at this time." Jack didn't hesitate. He returned the very next day. When he showed up at her door, she smiled and said, "I knew you'd come back, and right on time." That woman changed Jack's life completely. She guided him, challenged him, and gently pulled him onto the third path, the one few ever managed to walk. Remember, Jack was a gifted carpenter at heart, and under her influence, his mindset was shifting. He still stole to survive, yes, but he began to dream of something more, something honest. But fate, as always, had other, harsher plans. One day, while heading to visit the old woman for his next lesson, Jack crossed paths with a ghost from his past. The very first officer we mentioned, the man from the wooden cart. You might think, come on, what are the odds? 3 encounters with the same officer. But as unbelievable as it sounds, the legend is consistent. Every one of the 650-plus books, plays, and artworks about Jack agree. It happened. The same officer who once let him carve his face, the same one who beat him in the prisoner cart years earlier, ran into him again by sheer coincidence as Jack turned 22. Let's pause here and remember. When Jack escaped from that moving cart, his story went viral by 18th century standards. Now, get ready for a new kind of frenzy. The London authorities were furious, humiliated by the repeated failures. They were so determined to make Jack an example that, when they caught him again in 1724, they threw him in custody at the St. Giles Roundhouse, which you correctly called by one of its other names, Giles Roundhouse, then decided to parade him around the city like a trophy. They strapped him into an open wooden cart, wrists and ankles chained, and rolled him through London streets in broad daylight. The message was clear. It doesn't matter how clever a criminal is. The law always wins. No cage, no cover, just a public warning in human form. But Jack wasn't done. Using a tiny nail he'd hidden, he quietly picked the locks on his wrists and ankles while the crowd watched, completely unaware. And then, right in front of everyone, he jumped off the cart and vanished into the surging throng. People screamed, not in fear, but in awe. And here's the twist that solidified his legend. They helped him escape. Bystanders blocked the officers, forming human shields, and Jack disappeared like smoke in the wind. It was a moment so dramatic, so public, that some believe it sparked the very idea of the modern, mass-produced newspaper. For the first time, printed papers detailing his story were passed hand to hand across the kingdom. The entire nation was talking. The skinny boy escaped again. Theater troupes began putting on plays about him. Writers transformed him into a folk hero, a rebel, a symbol of resistance, a man standing up to the perceived corruption of the system. The constables were made out to be the villains. Jack Sheppard wasn't just a thief anymore. He was an icon. Desperate to restore their image, the authorities plastered his wanted posters across every wall. His face was etched in woodcuts and sketches all over London. Later that same year, they caught him again. The backlash was immediate. People marched in protest, demanding his release. The police, realizing they weren't just holding a criminal but a national symbol, decided to change tactics. If Jack were to die in an ordinary custody, the city might riot. So they moved him, carefully, to the high-security new prison in Clerkenwell. This time, they weren't taking any chances. They transported him in an armored wagon, flanked by 4 armed officers. He was chained the entire ride. When he arrived, he was still bound hand and foot. But Jack, as always, had prepared. Beneath the bandages on his arms and legs, he had 4 custom tools hidden. He spent a month in that prison. And during that time, something unexpected happened that would define the rest of his story. The guards at Clerkenwell noticed that Jack was strangely polite, quiet, almost noble. He never caused trouble. He even asked, repeatedly, if they could send word to the old woman he used to visit. He desperately wanted to see her again. At first, they ignored him, but eventually, perhaps out of pity or simply indifference, they removed his chains. He was given a little more freedom. He could eat with other inmates, breathe fresh air, and take a bath. And for the first time in years, Jack Sheppard looked calm. Remember that Jack was a carpenter by trade? He saw wood as pieces of possibility. One night in prison, he used that skill in the most desperate way. He slipped planks of wood into the prison latrine where they wouldn't be noticed, tying them together with a length of rope to fashion an improvised ladder. Under cover of darkness, he worked a small hidden tool and picked open the cell lock. He carried his homemade ladder to the prison yard and threw one end over the wall, snagging it onto a drain gutter. Then he climbed, piece by piece, and slipped over the wall into freedom. As soon as he was out, he ran through the streets, shouting, "I'm Jack! I escaped!" He told everyone how he'd done it and begged them to spread the word so he wouldn't be dragged back to the cells. The police were waiting where they expected him to go, the old woman's home. Within 3 days, they ambushed him outside her door and hauled him back into custody. This time, the jail held him in new prison, and they took every possible tool from him. He could have found a way to escape at any hour, but he waited for 3 agonizing months, hoping the old woman would come. She never did. There was a fact Jack didn't know, and that ignorance was breaking him. With no tools and no allies, he improvised again, relying on pure craft. He carved a slim, precise piece from a wooden bowl he'd used for food, then stole a small brass brazier from the kitchen. When his turn in the galley came, he quickly melted the brass over the cooking fire and cast it around his wooden blank. Once the metal cooled, he removed the inner wood, leaving a thin, hollow brass pick, shaped like an awl, long and slender. Night after night, he worked the tool, filing and shaping it until it fit his lock perfectly. One night, he used it. He picked the lock of his cell, slipped into the water channel that ran into the prison, the very sluice that carried water through the yard, and crawled inside. For hours, he wriggled through the stone trough, inching toward freedom. The prison raised the alarm, and patrols flooded the streets, but nobody expected him to escape through the waterworks. He didn't flee to the woods. He melted back into the massive crowds of the city, where he knew he would find safety. The public reception was legendary. People poured into the streets to greet him. Some workers went on strike, demanding that no one approach or harm their hero. Jack had become untouchable, a public red line no one dared cross. Then came the blow. The old woman who had helped him was dead. Grief-stricken, and perhaps feeling that his cause was truly over, Jack surrendered himself to the police, not in defeat so much as in profound resignation. They put him in Newgate Prison, the harshest jail of them all, a place designed to break the soul. He told people he intended to stay there for life. He'd lost hope twice, when his father died and when the old woman passed, and felt he had nothing left to run for. But Newgate was designed to inflict maximum brutality. Guards and inmates tormented him. The psychological agony was unbearable. In the final month of 1724, Jack chose escape again. He managed to pull a small nail from the ironwork of his cell door and spent a week working it free. He used that nail to saw through the bars of his cell window. From the window, he crept to the prison washroom, stole the laundry, tied the garments together into a makeshift rope, and climbed over the high wall. And so, once more, he slipped out into the world. In 1724, when prisons were neither modern nor secure the way we imagine today, and when such feats seemed nothing short of miraculous. Despite the police relying heavily on massive locks and iron doors, they fatally underestimated Jack's cunning and genius. Every time he was caught, he managed to escape without telling anyone his plans. His goal was clear: to flee Britain and live peacefully, far away from the fame and the chase. Jack's most famous escapes, the legendary ones that cemented his fame, occurred in a furious period of less than 6 months in 1724. While his total number of escapes from various custodies is often exaggerated in folklore, the verified count stands at 4 spectacular escapes in rapid succession. These 4 feats were so extraordinary and so publicized, they led to the mistaken belief that he had escaped 10 or even 16 times. Rewards were posted for anyone who could catch him, turning his young life into a true nightmare. Eventually, the highest British authorities decided that Jack's story must end. Following his recapture, he was placed in the strongest part of Newgate, the strong room or stone cell. To prevent any further miraculous escapes, he was imprisoned in a cell unlike any other, a tiny, rectangular space. He was heavily shackled with his hands tied above and legs tied below. However, the narrative about a box only 35 centimeters high is part of the later dramatization. In reality, he was confined in the most secure stone cell, chained with massive irons to the floor to prevent him from standing or moving easily. Despite these measures, Jack performed his most audacious escape in October 1724. Using a link from his chain and his unmatched skill, he managed to pick the padlocks, climb a chimney flue, break through 6 locked doors leading to the prison chapel, and finally use a blanket to descend from the roof to an adjacent house. He had been alone for hours, and the feat seemed supernatural. This final freedom, however, lasted only 2 weeks. Jack was apprehended while drunk, too exhausted to put up a fight. His death sentence was issued immediately, amid public protests demanding justice for the folk hero. On November 16, 1724, Jack was executed by hanging at Tyburn. An estimated 200,000 people attended his execution, a staggering number for that time, confirming his status as a living legend. The immense crowd and the atmosphere turned his death into a chaotic, unforgettable event. The people didn't stop at just watching. They tried every possible way to prevent the execution. While there was extreme public disorder, the claim that the police responded with gunfire, killing 2,500 people, is a highly exaggerated myth from later fictional accounts. The authorities hurried the execution to end the public spectacle and suppress the unrest, ensuring Jack's story was finished before the eyes of the massive crowd. After Jack was executed, he was quickly buried, reportedly in the graveyard of St. Martin in the Fields. though the exact location was obscured to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine. Yet, despite all efforts, he became a lasting symbol. His short, frantic life, just 22 years, lives on in dozens of popular proverbs and hundreds of literary and artistic works, notably inspiring the character Macheath in John Gay's famous opera, The Beggar's Opera. Jack Sheppard was a man who, through his sheer skill and cunning, defied all expectations and managed to achieve a kind of immortality. His transformation from a poor carpenter's apprentice to a working-class anti-hero cemented his name in English history, ensuring that the question is always asked, "No lock can stop Jack. It's all just an illusion." The final nod to his legacy is indeed the Jack-in-the-Box toy, a children's plaything that perfectly encapsulates the surprise of the skinny boy who kept springing back to freedom. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with friends who love great stories. And of course, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I always enjoy